I just before we started recording, I brought up the eco thing, and you said, "Yeah, that's cool." But what have you seen about it? Like,
dude, I feel like I don't understand it like enough to. Like I've like looked into it. So tell me if I'm wrong. It's positional sparring or putting yourself into positions and creating games around those positions that you're playing. So like, for example, if you're passing, it's trying to pin a hip to a floor so that you can go like cross grip pass or if you're, I don't know, something like that, right? It's like creating games that you guys are playing in positional sparring rounds. Is that correct?
that's close, but yeah, it's just looking at it from there's a bigger framework underneath it that doesn't just apply to jiu-jitsu.
Okay.
And actually, I could show you some games if you wanted.
But sick. Let's do it.
Cool.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, let's do it. The underlying thing is a theory of ecological dynamics. So like this isn't even referring to jiu-jitsu at all, but it's like the way that you learn to move and behave in your environment is just a relationship between you and the environment. So when you look at something like a glass of like this glass, you might perceive like the graspability of the glass. You might perceive the slipperiness of the glass, and by like interacting with that object in your environment, you'll learn to perceive like what the thing affords you. So I'm looking at this glass and like I can see that it doesn't appear like slippery or wet, and it looks small enough for me to grab, so I know it looks graspable. So that affords me the ability to grasp it, and I know that because I've like grabbed so many glasses throughout my life. Probably when I was a kid, I had no idea what it was, and I would just like smack it, and then eventually I realized that I can do things with it. So it's just this theory of like interacting with your environment. So like so a classic example, if we apply that idea to like jiu-jitsu, if I want to get past your feet and your knees to like pin you to the ground, like get chest to chest, I'm going to be like interacting with you in a way where I might put you in a certain position where now it looks like I can move between your legs. So now I've been afforded the opportunity of getting past your legs by going through them. So like that's afforded me that ability to do that. So it's just like perceiving what's going on in your environment and like what that allows you to be able to do.
Okay.
So that's just the
interesting
ecological dynamics theory, and that applies to like any sports or movement or anything.
It's bigger than just jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. And so what's happened is there's actually been so that theory goes back to like the early 1900s or something. And now there's several methodologies, like actual ways to design practices in sports, which use that theory. And one of the most popular one, like Greg Souders, the guy who's really popular teaching that stuff.
Didn't you visit there?
Yeah.
That's sick.
Yeah. He uses the constraints-led approach. So what he's trying to do is design jiu-jitsu practice in a way that takes advantage of this theory of ecological dynamics. And what he does is the constraints-led approach applies to all sports as well. What it's essentially doing is setting up constraints, because there's so much variability in jiu-jitsu, right? There's so much stuff that can happen if you just like put two people in the same room and say your goal here is to like, the way that Greg says it is we play the game of what does he say? Of immobilization that leads to strangulation and breaking. So like the whole point in jiu-jitsu is to immobilize somebody to the extent that you can like break a limb or strangle them, right? Okay. And you can immobilize somebody in a bunch of different ways, but there's so many options for doing that. And like, so what you want to do is play in practice design, you want to play in just very small areas of the full game of jiu-jitsu. So you want to limit this variability, and you do that by constraining what you can do when you're training. So that's where these games come from.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. So the idea is that, so like positional sparring in jiu-jitsu.
How is it different than positional though? Because like if you think of positional, you're constraining yourself to a position, and if you get out, then you reset.
Yeah.
So where is it different?
Yeah, it depends on how you define situational or positional sparring, right? so there's one, how you define it, and then two, like the intentions that are placed in these games. So like some typical ways you do positional sparring is like you'll start in mount, and then it's something like the first person to score, or the first person to like submit, or the first person to like do something, or you just start in a position and play all of jiu-jitsu, right?
Yeah.
So it's still like super variable. So maybe we start in mount and my goal is to like submit you. Well, there's 100 ways to submit you from mount. And then what if we change positions and like,
I see.
But how do you define positional sparring typically?
Yeah, I view it as like forcing yourself to fight from one position. And if you get out, then reset. And I guess for positional sparring, I like to start the resistance very low so that I'm able to do it without any strength. I just understand the concept of why I'm doing what I'm doing, or how I need to position myself to hit the technique. And then over time, I ramped up the resistance, and I try to figure out, okay, what's giving me issues? Why can I not do this? And less about just like doing the reps and feel more comfortable in the position. I feel more progress from knowing why I need to do something and how I need to put myself in the position to have success.
Got it.
So
are you trying to execute techniques when you're doing positional sparring? Is that what you're trying to do?
That's a good question. So it depends what I'm doing, but usually I don't put too much of a constraint. It's like find a way to sweep, or find a way to get double pant grip and sweep. But I don't really do. Sometimes I limit it to one technique, like just hit a triangle, just hit this. So how's that different than? So I'm like trying to figure out.
No, it's a good question.
I see the difference, but I feel like it's pretty small, right?
Yeah, it's pretty nuanced. So like in this constraints-led approach, there's actually no techniques being taught. What are instead taught? Actually, nothing is taught. What is demonstrated is like things in jiu-jitsu that don't change. And the idea is to build skills around those things. So say you're doing something that doesn't change in jiu-jitsu generally is like, actually mechanically, there's only like a few ways to break an arm, right? So in a classic like arm bar, you have to like control both ends of the arm and then apply like force in the middle to break it, right? You can also twist an arm to break it, right? But so just speaking about like a straight arm lock. And now like what somebody might do in a typical class to teach somebody an armbar is teach a sequence of steps, say going from mount to then going to S mount and then grabbing the arm and falling back and breaking it.
I see.
But the question is, that's like a choreographed sequence of moves, but the jiu-jitsu is everything else that's happening around that. And what that means is like, there's several skills involved in actually breaking an arm or getting to a position where you can break the arm. And that position of breaking the arm is sort of the invariant thing. Like that position has to happen for you to break an arm.
Okay.
So the things that have to happen and the skills that you have to have in order to actually break an arm from like the mounted position is one, the ability to control your opponent's head relative to the floor.
Okay.
Right? So that's one thing.
I see.
So you need a skill of being able to hold a guy down with your legs.
Yep.
The other skill is to be able to keep their hands separated.
Okay.
So you have to have the ability to hold the guy down, keep their hands separated.
I see.
And you have to have a third skill, which is the skill of controlling their shoulder.
Okay. Huh.
If you don't have control of their shoulder, they can get their elbow out and you're not controlling the arm anymore, right?
I gotcha.
Right, so there's 3 skills involved in an arm lock. So instead of teaching a sequence of steps to get into the arm lock, the games are set up in a way where you build those skills. So you're not given solutions to like step by step, here's procedurally how you execute an arm lock.
Yeah.
Here are games that put you in with enough constraints where it forces you to have to build a skill.
I think that's so smart, honestly.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Huh.
Yeah. So like one of the games might literally just be like your goal as the top player is to just simply, without trying to break the arm, hold the guy's arm and control their shoulder and keep their head down and just maintain this position.
So I do stuff like that when I positional spar.
Okay, interesting.
I for example, don't try to sweep from single leg X. I just try to, I made like a game in my head. I guess I am doing this actually. I make myself from single leg X, make the guy step with his forefoot on the the ground or make him drop a knee to the floor. And I would just do that and then reset. So it wasn't even like trying to sweep. I would just be like, find a way to get him his weight off of his front leg. And I'd tell my partner, do the opposite. And we just do that.
Why do you want to get the weight off his leg?
Because I learned one of the key concepts for sweeping on single leg X is if you can take the weight off the front leg because you don't want them to crowd you. So any way I can off balance them and get them to put their weight on the far leg or post a hand makes it easier for me to grab the far pant, or I could come up, or I could go for ankle lock. So I guess it's like, I am doing these games.
I think you're describing the exact thing.
Yeah, I do that a lot actually.
I think you're describing the exact thing because what you're doing in single leg X, what you've realized is that you need to build the skill of destabilizing the opponent.
Yes.
How do you destabilize the opponent? You put them on one leg, or you split their legs, or you can bring their legs together. How do you, another way to destabilize an opponent is if you can control both of their legs and their hips, right? It's like these, and what you're doing by like just forcing yourself to like get them to one leg or a knee or post their hands on the ground is you're building the skill of moving the person, which affords you the opportunity to then put them on a hip, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
So I do that all the time when I say positional sparring.
Interesting. Okay.
Because I guess what I'm saying is like I'm trying to find bigger level concepts of how to think about jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
So like the concept for me is how do I get their weight off of their weight on the far foot.
Yeah.
And then I'm not just positional sparring single leg X, I'm just trying to do that. And if I get their weight on the far foot, then we'll reset. Or the other day I was telling my opponent to try to grab my sleeve from single leg X so they could do like the back step. And I was just trying to find ways to get the pant grip without them grab my sleeve, or how to off balance them so they can't grab my sleeve because they'd have to post their hand and then I could grab the far pant.
Yeah.
So I'm making these games in my head as I'm drilling it.
Yeah. I think you're describing the constraints-led approach.
That's why I do that a lot actually. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Shit.
That's it. I sort of had like a mind blown moment too, because I realized at the before I left Kaio's, what I ended up doing, because I felt like my eyes were glazing over from just like learning techniques and drilling and stuff, and I would just wait until sparring so that I wouldn't even tell my partners. I would just go with somebody like my skill level or below so that I could force us into a position so that I could work like games like that. And then I would just reset myself. So I'd like pass the guard, for example, and then like let them re-guard or something.
Yep.
And I realized I was like, without even knowing this was a thing, training like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I see exactly. I do the same thing. Actually.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm thinking like, I feel like that's where I made a lot of my progress. I guess it's taking that approach. I just didn't know what to call it. Because like when I'm passing, it's like the camping position. I realize like I'm not just practicing the move. I'm trying to figure out the concept and then getting so good at that concept, which I guess is the ecological approach. So for example, again, the camping position, I've learned that if I could connect my head to my arm, because I don't have my head far like that, and then I stay at a degree that like perpendicular, I'm not like here, then it's so hard for them to high pummel. So like so then I tried to just tell my partner, just try to high pummel, and we just play that game, which is literally...
That's the constraints-led approach.
Yeah, so I'm doing that all the time then.
Dude, that's crazy. I had like an intuition. I was like, because I was thinking about coming to talk to you about this stuff, and I was like, because a common thread seems to be like, I wanted to figure out how you're like training and stuff, and I was like, I wonder, because I think a lot of people start to do this kind of thing without realizing it, that it's a thing. And I was like, I wonder if Jared's doing that.
I'm fully doing that, yeah.
I literally asked Matt before I came here. I was like, I wonder if Jared's doing eco stuff, like the constraints-led approach, because it's exactly that. So like what you're doing in that camping position, we've defined all these things as techniques. But really what you're doing in like that camping position is building the skill of staying in front of the guy's feet.
Exactly.
And that's one step to passing his guard. So, in order to pass a guard and get chest to chest or chest to back, you have to pass the feet and the knees.
Yep.
And once you've passed the feet and you're camping, right, what you're doing is building the skill of holding the guy down while preventing him to put his feet back in front of you.
Yes.
There's no guard. You're not past a guard.
I'm not thinking about a technique. It's more just like the concept of what you're doing.
Right.
And I do that for every position that I think about. When I'm going for like a knee cut from like a headquarters position, I used to get so obsessed with what is it that's stopping me from knee cutting him? And I was like, oh, it's when they could keep their hip on their right butt cheek or whichever side they're playing. I was like, how do I get their hip to the left side? So I just try to figure out how to change their hip from this direction to that direction. I felt like that was the whole fight. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is literally like you're thinking about it just like as less a technique and more of what's the movement or pattern that you need to hit to have the technique work.
Yeah, these are like what they describe as the affordances. It's exactly that. So like, I was using the word pass through ability because Greg said it. So like, the thing that you were building the skill of, like you realize that you can, that the opponent's guard is knee cuttable.
Yeah.
Only when specific conditions are met.
Yeah.
And then you started building skills to make those conditions present so that the guard is knee cuttable, right?
I think that's like one of the most important ways to improve.
Yes.
Like, yeah. Now that you've like verbally explained to me what I'm doing, because I was saying like being intentional with my training. I think there are other things I'm doing, kind of like writing down what's happening, what's not. But at the end of the day, it's like if you approach jiu-jitsu like that, I feel like you're teaching yourself more than if I'm just knee cutting and you're just trying to go faster and you're just trying to hit it, but you're not thinking like why or how or what's the movement that needs to happen to make the technique work.
Yeah, that's what Greg says that. I'm like a super fan of Greg now, but like because he describes jiu-jitsu as everything else that's happening around the techniques, right? A knee cut is a thing that happens, but that only happens because like of all the other stuff, that all of the other things that were happening. The jiu-jitsu is actually in like moving the opponent's hips and like getting rid of frames and like the grip fight. Like jiu-jitsu is everything else that happened that immediately preceded this thing that you did that we call a knee cut.
Yep.
Because once all the conditions are met for you to knee cut, the knee cut, it's like, it's not hard to do, right? It's not, and you can rep the knee cut over and over, but what you're doing is by drilling like that movement of a knee cut, all you're repping is the outcome of everything else that happened that was supposed to happen before. And you can only train all of that other stuff like moving that guy's hip or whatever with actual live resistance, right?
Yeah.
That's the only way that you can.
I'm so glad you explained this like verbally to me because it's kind of cool to hear that approach.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain it kind of. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like my one training partner.
But you know, you can tell.
That's exactly what I'm doing. Yeah. Like one of my training partners, Noah, he's like one of my good friends at Optus. When we drill together, it's like, we're not like, okay, we're doing 10 reps each and then we switch. It's like, we're kind of like talking through like, what are you doing here? Okay, can you do it now? I'm like, okay, if your hip's on this side, can you do it? Okay, if I bring your hips square, can you pummel your leg? So we're like going through these like back and forth like verbal exchanges and like talking through like what's making this move successful. And then I feel like once we could verbally like understand what it is to make a move successful, then you don't necessarily need to like drill it 1,000 times. It's more just like, okay, I'm here in the roll, keep my hand connected to here and like past the knee line, you know?
Right.
Makes jiu-jitsu more fun too.
Yeah, you're like, what you're doing is like this process of like figuring out what conditions need to be met for you to like do a thing that you want to do.
So is the whole game then to figure out, or the whole, I feel like half the fight's just figuring out what are the games you need to create. Because the games, if you know the games that you need to create, then you know what's important. And I feel like knowing what's important is like the hardest part.
Right. And you figure out what's important by like, by figuring out what everybody who's good at jiu-jitsu is doing.
Yeah.
And how can you do that? There's a lot of ways. You can watch jiu-jitsu matches. You can watch instructionals. You can like
watch too many, bro.
Yeah, but I think that's how we figure this stuff out. So the hard part is like the actual practice design. It's like how do you design games? You have to know what's important first. How do you know what's important? Well, you have to be an expert at jiu-jitsu. Like you have to know what's happening. So then how do you get to that point? I don't know, like watch people do jiu-jitsu and watch instructionals and like I think you can gather all of that knowledge, but then but like the practice design is the, like once you have that knowledge, then you can accurately describe design practice, right?
I see. You explained the ecological approach. So I've had like I'm not a great learner maybe sometimes, but like I couldn't fully understand the difference, but now I feel like I see what you're saying with it.
Yeah.
Like that makes sense.
Yeah.
You should make like a YouTube video, like, what is the ecological approach? Like, explain it.
Yeah. I've actually...
I think you did, right?
There's, I've done 2 videos on it so far. I've been working on a 3rd video, which I've already put like 40 hours into editing or something.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's actually titled, Can Beginners Learn BJJ Without Drilling?
Oh,
And
that's a good like clip now.
Yeah, but it's specifically targeted towards like people who haven't done jiu-jitsu before.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm working on that video right now. But it describes some of these concepts, but it doesn't describe, I guess, exactly the way we talked about it. But now we have the way we talked about it on video. So
Let's go.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Cool. Okay, I think that was it for that
Beautiful.
last question. But dope. Yeah. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for the roll. You gotta say it. You gotta say it.
What do I say?
Thanks for the roll.
Thanks for the roll. Check out the shirt there. That is the emoji too. That's hilarious.
Hell yeah. Thanks, bro.
Boom. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah.
That was great.
That was fun.